Okay.
Okay, do we have a quorum, Bonnie, before we get started, or?
We do. We have Ms. Ginsburg, Mr. Oakham, yourself, and Ms. Sanchez.
Perfect.
So we got 4. Okay.
Then I'll go ahead and call to order the meeting of the Audit Committee and the Board of Retirement and Board of Investments. Today is Thursday, June 24th, 2021, and the time is 9 a.m. The second item is going to be approval of the minutes, but before we do that, let's go ahead and let staff have an opportunity to do a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting, so I will do a roll call of all the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Bernstein, Ms. Gray, Mr. Knox, Ms. Ginsburg,
Present.
Mr. Oakham,
Here.
Ms. Sanchez, Mr. Kelly.
Here, I'm here.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. And Mr. Kehoe.
Present.
Okay, from the Board of Retirement, we have Ms. Zapanta, Mr. Harris, Mr. Moore, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Robbins, Mr. Santos,
Present.
and from the Board of Investments, we have Mr. Green, Ms. Greenwood, Mr. Santos,
Present
And
on the count of 4.
thank you, and Mr. Jones. Okay, staff participating in the meeting include AEO JJ Popovich, Chief Counsel Steve Rice, Plant Moran External Auditor Jean Young, Plant Moran External Auditor Amanda Cronk. Internal audit staff include Richard Bendel, Leisha Collins, Christina Logan, Catherine Tunn, Nathan Amick, George Lundy, Gabriel Tafoya. Audit Committee Consultant, Robert Griffin. Trustees, if you have a comment or question on any item, please use the Zoom chat option to be placed on queue. At this time, we ask that all participants to mute their mics until we are ready to speak, or now that you may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and ask for the approval of the minutes of April 23rd. I'll need a motion. I'll go ahead and move it. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Let's go ahead and please do a roll call.
Okay, Mr. Oakham, Mr. Oakham, Ms. Sanchez,
Yeah, I could
Aye.
unmute.
Aye.
Ms. Ginsburg,
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe.
Aye.
Okay, the approval of the minutes passed unanimously.
Thank you. And next item is public comments. So I will turn that over to staff to call on public comments.
Good morning, Mr. Keel. We have received 4 requests from the public. However, we only have 1 person online. So we will go ahead and move Mr. Michael Ginn into the meeting now. Mr. Ginn, please enter *6 to unmute yourself, and you may begin. Mr. Ginn, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You may proceed now.
All right, greetings and salutations to the board and staff. Good morning. My name is Michael A. Gwynn, and I'm a LACERA member. And if you're not familiar with me, I've been calling in regards to the current state of affairs at the Crenshaw Mall. More specifically, to date, Mr. Schwartzman, again, my statement is, Mr. Schwartzman is a failed developer who has a known track history of using unethical and inhumane practices that leave tenants no other option than to be wrongly evicted from their apartments. Number 2, Schwartzman has no interest in protecting the tens of thousands of Black people who make the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw the historic and thriving commerce center that it is today. He would rather replace the people with multi-million-dollar condos so gentrification can remake the racial makeup of the community. 3, he has demonstrated the disgusting attitudes towards women and Black people when he said, "I hope she gets raped by 10 Black men in South Central," in regards to a female opposing attorney. Outrageous. This, among his other problematic tendencies, shows he is very unsafe and unfit to redevelop anything in our community. Case number referencing BC 296143. Number 4, why does your pension fund continue to ignore the legitimacy of these CRs? Far more competitive bid. Why does our unapologetic Blackness seem to bother you so much when it comes to transforming our community? Number 5, by ignoring DCR's best bid, you are ignoring the best development group for the Crenshaw community. There's nothing denying our financial position, expertise, community engagement, and cultural awareness. It's much more solid than any other group. Remember, we've raised $28 million and probably an additional $59 million of letters of credit, of note, on public record. Lastly, number 6, DCR and its thousands of supporters will not stand for it. We will drive out HDG just like we drove out CMI and LiveWorks. I thank you for your time. I yield the floor back to the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Was there anyone?
Mr. Kehoe, there is somebody in queue. However, I'm not the number that they're calling from. I'm not sure who they are. So I don't know if you want to move them into the meeting and ask them their name, but we don't have that specific phone number on our list of callers today.
Well, let's give them an opportunity. So if we can bring them into the meeting and then see if they wanted to provide a public comment.
Okay. Let me see what number there. It's a 714 number. Let me just check one thing. Hello, caller. Your area code is actually 714. I'm not going to give the phone number. If you can just go ahead and unmute your phone by entering *6.
Hi, this is Ricky. I'm sorry.
Okay, it was Ricky.
Ricky, we're always happy to hear public comment from you if you want.
Okay, that concludes public comment.
Okay. If there's no, because I know there was 3 others that indicated that they were willing to. If there's no objection from the rest of the committee, we'll table the remaining public comments towards the end and see if anybody else calls in with comments. So hearing no objection, we'll proceed. We'll table public comments and we'll move on to the non-consent item. Item A, which is a recommendation submitted by Mr. Bendel, that the committee approve the proposed fiscal year 2021 and 2022 internal audit plan. We have a memo and I believe a presentation as well. So I'll turn that over to staff.
Hey, good morning, Audit Committee. I'm going to do the presentation regarding our audit plan. To better align internal audit resources with the upcoming fiscal year, we are providing the committee with our fiscal year 2022 audit plan. I'll provide an overview of the process that we undertook as far as developing the audit plan, and then give some insight into some of those key projects and audits that we have planned for next year. So let's start out with the audit plan development. There are various factors that come into play when we're developing the audit plan. Most importantly is our risk assessment. So this is when we're looking at our audit universe. Those are all of the auditable areas within the organization, business functions, policies, and procedures. And we have a risk rating tool where we look at each of those business functions and then we rate them so that we can identify those areas of the highest risk and areas of concern that we need to include in our audit plan. We also conduct meetings with our managers. So we have them complete a risk survey, we meet with them, we discuss any significant changes in their division, and we identify any of those areas of concern and possible audits. We also meet with the executive office to get their input, as well as the audit committee. You may recall that at our February and April meeting, we had some discussions on risk. So all of those are incorporated into our audit plan. Another point to keep in mind regarding our audit plan is that we consider it a living document in that as we are moving through the year, we do have to make changes to our audit plan, because there are shifts in priorities, changes come about within the organization. So as we are moving through the year, we do provide updates to the audit committee, our audit plan status update report at each audit committee meeting. And if there are any significant changes that we need to make to the audit plan, we do provide that to the audit committee for their approval. Now, some of the guidelines that we use in developing the audit plan include the type of engagements. So there's 3 basic types. There's assurance, consulting, and advisory. Assurance and consulting are the primary ones that we incorporate into our audit plan. Assurance is just providing an objective examination of evidence for the purpose of providing an independent assessment to management as well as the audit committee. A good example of that would be like our credit card audit, where it's a compliance audit. We're assessing if the card holders are in compliance with our requirements. Consulting engagements are the other type of engagements that we include in our audit plan. That's when we're working more with manager, advising them on areas of improvement, and how they can go about that without assuming management's responsibility. A good example of that would be like our quality assurance consulting review that we did a couple of months ago, where we were looking at the division and areas of ways to enhance it. Now, in determining our resources and how many hours we have to work with, we sort of go through a process of identifying all the hours that we have available. As you note here, we do have 6 full-time employees or FTEs in our audit division. And that is because of, well, let me back up by saying, we have 11 audited budgeted positions. We don't include a chief audit executive hours because he oversees the entire operations of internal audit and not for specific audits or projects. We do have an admin assistant, so we don't include her hours because she doesn't work on audits and projects. And then we have 1 staff that is temporarily working in another division. We have 1 vacancy, and then we have another senior auditor that is currently on leave. So what we whittled down to was 6 FTEs, and moving into the next fiscal year, those are the hours that we would be using for our audit plan. Overall, our goal is to have 70% of all of those hours towards audits and projects. So that leaves us 15% for those unplanned audits that always come about as we're going through the year. And then 15% for internal audit administrative tasks. That's when we're doing training, we're preparing for our audit committee, we're working on our teammate audit software, and just doing all those internal audit processes. Now, the next 4 or 5 slides are a description of each of those audit areas and projects that we've included in the audit plan. Instead of going through and running through that list, I'm just going to direct you back to our audit plan for fiscal year 2022. I know it's a little bit small when you look at it through the presentation, but it is included on page 3 of the memo. What we've included here are all of those projects that we have planned for the next fiscal year. We've included the division where the audit is actually conducted, the frequency. The audit assignment identifies if the audit is performed by internal audit staff or one of our external firms. You may recall that we have an audit pool we brought to the audit committee for approval. Going forward, we will provide to the audit committee those audits that we plan to use those external firms in order to get approval. And then that last column identifies a quarter assigned. That's an estimate of when we plan to start each of these projects. So that completes my overview. And at this time, I'll pause and see if there's any questions that we can address for you.
Perfect. I'll open it up for questions. Please feel free to use the chat if you have any.
Question.
Gina.
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation, Leisha. It's always very helpful to go through this. I have a question for either you or Richard. I took note, and I don't know to what degree anybody has followed the FBI probe of PCERS that started in May. For those of you who don't know, PCERS is a Pennsylvania plan. They're a $56 billion plan, so similar size to ours, smaller, of course. However, they are being probed over a $1 million reporting error in their investment team. It's a 4 basis point misstatement of performance. Where would our kind of making sure that we have, I know, we have gone over these issues in the past and have been told that these are immaterial, but the reality is that they can result in a probe, as has happened now in real time in May for PCERS. Where does that land in our audit plan? So not just ensuring, for example, real estate performance reporting, which is which was disconnected from financial reporting. Where will that land in our audit plan, Leisha, to ensure that we have all of the right controls, et cetera, in place?
And looking back at our audit plan, I don't know if you could bring that back up, Christina.
Yeah, I'm looking at the investments in FASD 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. I'm assuming it would land somewhere, at least when I understood it, item 22 is the financial audit. However, that seemed to be somewhat divorced from performance. And I want to make sure that, especially in light of what's happening at PCERS, that we ensure that the scope of that is correct.
Okay, let me see, we roll back through.
Is
Okay,
it
so
showing,
item,
Leisha?
I'm sorry.
Is it showing?
Yes, it is
Okay.
now. So you mentioned item 22, Gina?
Yeah, item 22
Okay,
under
so-
investment in FASD.
Item 22 is actually oversight of the financial audit. So I actually have 4 different categories where we have oversight. The first one is oversight. That's all of the TC financial audits that occur. We oversee the external auditors that actually perform those. 22 is oversight of our financial audit. That's the external financial audit of LACERA. So
That's 21, Alicia. I think that's 21. So 22 is investment due diligence, and that's looking at the operational due diligence process. Is that,
That's 23.
No, that's 23.
Wow,
That's
I'm
22
okay.
is the oversight of the
My
external
eyes.
auditors.
I
23 is the
I guess the
investment.
point that I'm making is let's figure out where that needs to go, because that's certainly something that we want to tie up. Because one of the assertions that the FBI is making against PCERS is intangible right of honest service, which really actually comes down to intent. But I think that we really need to make sure that we are never in that situation. And that means that we are making, all of the efforts that it takes to exert controls.
Okay. I think that is a very good point. And as part of this discussion, that is an area that we can include in our audit plan. I think we do have 23, which is investment due diligence. It's more of a consulting engagement, and we're going to use one of our external firms to look at the operations regarding operational due diligence. But in light of what you just brought up at this point, I think that's a good point that we can just go ahead and include that in our audit plan for next fiscal year.
We may want to hear from this. One of the things is in the risk assessment, we do look at all elements of the organization, and performance is included in that. I know that performance is under the purview of the consultants as well. So there are many eyes on the performance, but it's something that we could have looked at independently. And I don't know if Mr. Grable wants to comment on further on the issue of controls around that, but that is something, of course, that we could consider as some sort of external review. I
think it's a good time right now, given that we're doing a lot of review and we're doing staff replacement and et cetera in the real estate area, that it's a perfect time to sort of reevaluate our process and set good processes in place that everybody's comfortable with. So I just, it's perfect timing for that. But I just caught my eye and, you know, is something, and you should look into it. It's a bit fascinating.
Thank you. And I share, Richard, I think we're sharing the same glasses because I'm seeing the same number of rows as you. And so I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, 22 is definitely investment due diligence on my screen.
But that's what I'm seeing here, unless I'm going crazy. But that doesn't matter. It's ultimately all the content was good. Good conversation. Any additional questions from any committee members?
Yeah, I put one on chat,
Oh,
Sean.
yeah.
I even figured out how to do that. When you look at 19 and 20, Richard, that's the oversight of the THC real estate financial audits and oversight of real estate manager reviews. So I think you are looking into real estate. You know, real estate is a moving target because everything else, what the values are each day. Real estate, and I don't know how often you have to evaluate that, but can change in a moment based on COVID, which I'm sure it's changed and now it's coming back. So how do you handle those changes on your auditing, Richard, particularly real estate, which Gina brought up a good point?
I know that related to real estate valuation, that there are external valuations performed, I believe at least annually now, on all real estate properties, and they're all audited externally as well. So that I'm fairly confident about the valuation. Of course, the performance issue that Ms. Sanchez talked about is something that would also fall into the real estate area. And I think beyond that, all asset classes, I think she was referring to.
Do we have to do that a little more often? Maybe twice a year, or do you think once a year is sufficient?
I will defer to the real estate group if anybody is online that can address those questions, but I believe we just increased it to the once a year externally. So,
okay, used to be more.
Less frequently, I believe, about every 2 to 3 years externally, and was actually done by internal evaluation within the investment managers. But now we have a more frequent independent valuation, which I definitely think is way better.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can pipe in there as well. That is the current industry standard. So we have moved to industry standard.
Thank you. I also have Mr. Grable with comments.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. Good morning, trustees. A couple comments. One is we have tried to put tremendous sunlight on the real estate program, where historically it was in effect a single line item. We've now disaggregated it because of, first of all, the size of the assets, but also because of issues such as the ones that Ms. Sanchez made reference to in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania situation may have a different underlying issue, as that resulted in different, it's like a couple basis points change the level of contributions of, I believe, employers, of the employers and employees. But as it relates to performance, we just switched our book of record from our consultant to a third party, so that there's much more independence on performance, but we welcome any review and oversight of that. Second, as it relates to appraisals, we used to operate under a methodology where appraisals were done every third year, and in the interim, it was done by our third-party managers. We've outsourced it where we have an independent firm that oversees the appraisals, and we appraise every property on an annual basis, such that there's, once again, much more transparency and sunlight into the program.
Thank you very much.
I'll go ahead and move the item.
I'll second it.
As recommended.
And just to confirm, what action are you recommending? Accept
To accept and file.
Perfect. It's been moved and seconded to accept and file the report. Let's go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Just for technicality, I believe this requires approval, right? It's approval of the audit plan, not
Sorry,
accept.
I move to approve.
My apologies. So it's going to be approval of the audit plan. So let's go ahead. Everybody's clear on the vote. So let's go ahead and please vote.
Mr. Oakham,
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez,
Aye.
Ms. Ginsburg,
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe.
Aye.
Okay. The proposed fiscal year 2021 internal audit plan has been approved.
Great, thank you. Item is approved, and we'll move on to item B, which is to discuss the audit of Los Angeles County's compliance with requirements for rehired retirees and approve and provide one of the 4 following actions. So let's go ahead and turn that over to staff for a short presentation.
Hi, good morning, Chair Kehoe and trustees. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. In front of you, you have our rehired retirees audit. We perform this annually. It's based around 3 specific objectives. One is that no rehired retirees shall exceed a 960-hour limit in a fiscal year. And then there are 2 break in service exceptions that are dependent upon your service type and your age, where a retiree may have to wait as little as 90 days to be rehired or as many as 180 days to be rehired. So those are the 3 objectives that we tested to. However, this year, because of COVID, the state issued an executive order that basically waived all 3 of those requirements, but it only waived them as of March 12th, 2020. So if you exceeded anything prior to that, you were not an allowable exception. So taking into consideration the allowable exceptions put forth by the state, we tested to those areas as well. And as a result of our testing, in which we did 100% testing of all 475 rehired retirees, we found 1 exception with regards to the 960-hour limit. The individual went over 414 hours, and we had no exceptions with regard to the 90-day break-in service or the 180-day break-in service. And I can take any questions that you may have.
I'll open it up for questions.
Sean, just a quick question. In 19, we had 5, which average hours, total overage hours was 47. Did we pick that up this year? And then 18, we had 6. Did we pick that this year on the audit and we only do it every 3 years, or was that picked up on those 2 years?
No, those are numbers from previous year's audits.
Right.
To
Okay.
show a historical record.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. Was there a reason that the overage was so much? Was it a pandemic related or?
I can't make an assumption to that. I don't exactly know. The individual in question did have some hours related to COVID. They did have some timesheet amendments, but no additional amendments were obtained, and we could not make a determination as if those were COVID related hours. So we had to recognize them as non-COVID related, as thus be an exception.
Got it. And what happens when we find folks who are non-compliant, out of curiosity?
So the process starts here with the approval of this memo, and then Richard, along with our CEO, Mr. Kryman, they'll draft a letter to the county CEO letting them know of these exceptions and request a follow-up on those items. Over the past, I would say 7 to 10 years, we've had a very big improvement in this area. When I first started doing this, we had 20, even 30 individuals that went over. And through the years, there's been a lot of education performed by the county, particularly their benefits and employee relations department. And they've really worked with a lot of the HR division throughout the county to educate them to ensure that everybody knows what these compliance areas are and that they meet them.
Got it. So if we accept and approve, does that mean that you continue on your process? Like we don't have to do anything else?
That is correct.
That's
Thank
correct,
you.
yeah.
Okay, just clarification. So I'll move to accept and approve.
Yeah, I'll accept it. I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. There's no further discussion. Let's go ahead and please vote.
Okay, Mr. Oakham,
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez,
Aye.
Ms. Ginsburg,
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe.
Aye.
This motion has been accepted and filed.
Thank you. That brings us to item C, which is that the committee review and discuss the title holding company's stale check review and provide the following actions. I'll go ahead and then pass that one over to staff for a discussion.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair and trustees. Again, so this is this was the issue that was brought to light by Plant Moran, brought it to our attention in September of 2020, and relates to the title holding company stale checks. That was brought to our attention that there were approximately 9 stale checks that were not deposited within the investment office. When we began our review and looked into it, we found there were actually about 104 checks. And so the focus of this review, the scope of the review, was really on evaluating what was being done to retrieve, reissue these checks and retrieve the lost monies, which totaled approximately $260,000, I think. It's broken out in the page 2 of the executive summary background, that at the conclusion of the audit, 46 of the checks had been reissued and deposited, totaling $180,000. There were 41 more checks outstanding that we are currently expecting to retrieve, many of those from the California Franchise Tax Board. And there are an additional 17 checks that they so far have been unable to have reissued, but we're expecting they're going to continue in the pursuit of those checks. We also did meet with various parties responsible for the process and consulted with them on that, but we did not evaluate the current process. We are going to be following up on that in the next fiscal year. We'll be following up on the controls around the current process, as well as the check and cash management practices throughout the organization to validate good practices in all parts of the organization where we receive checks from members. The 2 recommendations in this report, the first relates just to the elevation of an issue like this. When it became known to the real estate team, it should have been elevated to either the LACERA incident response team, internal audit, or the executive office. And the other is a recommendation that relates to the controls that we're recommending around the management of these checks. And I will point out that there were numerous complexities, as John has discussed, and in the management of these real estate. It's operationally intensive, involves much more than some of the other asset classes, and those complexities also played a role in this issue. But we need to address a sound system of internal control around these checks.
Richard, what has been the history of these checks in the past? Is this normal, abnormal? What is the situation?
So I think within the controlled process of the title holding corporations that are managed by the investment managers, investment advisors, the process is effective and works well. It's the issue happens. Corporations are closed out, they become inactive, and then checks that are not expected, unexpected checks arrive at the organization, and that is the situation. In terms of the history in the past, we were only able to go back as far as, so I don't know the extent to which I'm not aware of any issues that we've had with these types of checks beyond the ones that we looked at in the scope.
Thank you, Rich.
Yeah, Richard, my understanding was that a lot of these were tax rebates that are received back. Were there other forms of checks?
There were other checks as well. Some of them just maybe settlements with tenants if there were lawsuits or issues with tenants. The occasional tenant check that came in, and perhaps that was after the sale of the property, then it was an owed check. A number of smaller, from business partners of the properties, But most of them, I think the majority of, certainly in financially in terms of the volume of dollars they were tax rebates.
Mhm. And now some of those could be expected. And is that the process that because I know unexpected checks, of course, there's no way to know what you're not expecting. But is there a process for sort of understanding what we should be expecting some form of tax rebate and when to follow up on that?
I believe they are logging that now, and even the tax rebates, though, I don't think are a sure thing. I think they're granted by the taxing authorities. It's not a sure thing that they're going to grant the rebate or not, but I think at least accounting for the ones that they've applied for.
Exactly. I mean, at least at the California Endowment, we used to keep track of every single application that we put in, so we knew when to chase up rebates. But yeah.
Yes,
okay.
And we will be looking at that process further.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions on this? Thank you very much. It was a great catch by our auditors, and I'm glad that we have a process in place now, or at least addressing the issue. I'll need a motion to.
I'll move it, Sean.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded to accept and file the report. If there's no further discussion, let's go ahead and please vote.
Mr. Oka,
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez,
Aye.
Ms. Ginsburg,
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe.
Aye.
The motion passes to accept and file the report.
Thank you. So we accept and file the report. We're moving on to our reports. We have 3 presentations, A, B, and C, and then items D through I will be receiving and filing. So if anybody has questions on those, please let me know and we'll pull them for discussion. But let's go ahead and proceed with item A, which is our pre-audit communication.
Good morning, Audit Committee. I am going to be introducing Jean Young, the partner on our financial audit, and Amanda Kronk, who is the senior manager for our financial audit. They will be reviewing the pre-audit communication for this fiscal year's annual financial audit. They're going to be going over the timing, the scope, and their approach to the audit. So Amanda and Jean, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Sure.
Yes.
All right, great. If you want to move to the next slide. So as Christina said, we're really just here to cover the overview of the audit process. It's really meant to be a two-way conversation. So we kind of develop our plan based on our industry knowledge, what we've seen at LACERA in the past, and just any issues that are going on within the current environment. And we just want to kind of have that discussion. So if you move to the next slide. Really what we do is we have 3 audits that we express an opinion on. So the first one would be the annual financial statements, and that is the one that the timing would take place in August, September, with a report date in October. And then we have 2 other reports that are completed, and these are really related to GASB 68 and 75 for the employers. So these will be done around the same time, but maybe issued later, and they will be used by the employers for their June or their 22 reporting period. So these really have a year lag, but we do the procedures as we're doing the annual financial statement. With that, Amanda's going to kind of highlight some of the audit areas that we focus on. And again, if you have any questions during the presentation for us, please ask.
Good morning. So as Jean mentioned, I'm gonna give you a high-level overview of our planning for LACERA's audit, and certainly some of the areas that we're planning to focus on during our audit. So as you can see here, our responsibilities related to the audit are to express an opinion on the reports that Jean just mentioned. And that opinion will be to ensure those reports are free from material misstatement and certainly are in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. So our audit procedures are designed as such to ensure that LACERA's reports are, again, free from material misstatement. As in the past, our opinion letter will include an emphasis of matter paragraph. So We've included some draft wording here, and this emphasis really surrounds LACERA's harder to value investments. So again, we've been talking about the THCs, those would be included here, and other harder to value investments, which really encompasses investments that are not publicly traded or investments that don't have a readily available fair market value. So one color commentary I would like to add here is this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just alerting the reader to the fact that management does have to insert some level of estimation regarding the value of these investments at June 30th. So again, our audit procedures are very thorough in relation to these investments. And certainly, as you'll see here in the coming slides, we have identified these harder to value investments as a risk in our audit, and thus have designed appropriate audit procedures to address that risk. As I mentioned, we do identify risks as part of our planning process. So Plante Moran's audit approach, as you may be familiar with, is focused in risk areas. So again, we spend a lot of time really now, so leading up to LACERA's audit, thinking about, like Jean said, current market conditions, what's going on out in the world that we think could impact not only LACERA, but our audit. So again, as I mentioned, we've identified LACERA's valuation of investments at June 30th, 2021 to be a risk. Again, we develop audit procedures to address that particular risk. We have also identified the accuracy of census data to be a risk. And the risk there really is focused on the active data and related payroll information that particularly is being provided by the county. So again, we've designed procedures to mitigate that risk, which includes detailed testing at the county. We perform those procedures with county employees at the very level of the county payroll. We perform and have identified your actuarial assumptions to be a risk, particularly to not only LACERA's financial reporting, but again, at the employer level. So we do extensively audit those assumptions to ensure that they're reasonable, and again, that they get LACERA to a materially correct total pension liability. Certainly the accuracy of benefit payment calculations that are being provided to members, and along with disability claims, the accuracy of those calculations is certainly a risk. Again, we do recognize that LACERA did make a transition from a more manual process to a more technologically involved process. But again, nonetheless, those calculations do involve some essence of a manual calculation, and we certainly acknowledge that and indicate that that is also a risk to the audit. Lastly, I know we're all very well aware that we've been living in a pandemic. That does also pose a risk to the audit from the perspective of people may be working remotely, schedules may be, interwoven, if you will, and certainly any implications that has on internal controls certainly could pose a risk, and we will audit to ensure that there are no financial statement risks related to that. And certainly if we see any recommendations, we will certainly bring that back to the board. So I did mention internal controls. I wanted to give you a little bit of perspective on our approach to testing internal controls. While we don't issue an opinion specifically on the effectiveness of LACERA's internal controls, we do audit through those controls, and we certainly will ensure that not only are they operating effectively and as intended, but again, should we see any room for improvement, we certainly don't we don't shy away from making any recommendations as we see them. So we utilize narratives and questionnaires that management and the LACERA team do compile. We design procedures to walk through those controls that are described to us. And again, any results would be shared with the group. The concept of materiality, one more comment, materiality. So I've mentioned that a few times now. We don't audit every single transaction. That's not feasible, and it's just not cost beneficial to LACERA. So instead, we focus again on the risks that we've just discussed, and certainly any transactions that may have a greater risk of misstatement. So we do focus on the areas again where the risk would lie, and perhaps not so much on the smaller transactions where the risk is certainly less. Part of our discussion today really, as Jean mentioned, includes an open dialogue. We certainly want to hear from the audit committee regarding any risks or any concerns, or certainly any questions that you have regarding the audit process. And we certainly would like that feedback so we can discuss internally to see if any procedures should be designed to address that risk. So what I'd like to do now is just open it up to the audit committee and hear from all of you.
I will open it up here if there's any questions or comments from any members.
John, I do have a question for Amanda. I think you said something, what you're doing is you're taking pieces and evaluating those pieces. Is that correct? In all the areas that you just said. Once you evaluate those pieces, then you will make recommendations if we have to improve internal operations.
Absolutely. So we test far more than what's included on that risk slide, but our audit process, as we're moving through it, we're in constant communication with the management team. And as we identify things that we think we may have a recommendation on, we discuss those items at length with management, A, to make sure that we understand the process, and then B, that allows us to refine any recommendations that we do have. So to your point, the answer is yes. So if we do have any recommendations, as we have, we had a few last year that we shared with management. And again, the same would hold true this year. As we identify anything, we first, as your external audit firm, need to conclude whether or not that represents an internal control deficiency. And we have a lot of decision factors there. But assuming that it doesn't rise to the level of an internal control deficiency, we then would make any recommendations as we see fit from there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have a question, I have a comment and a question. So you couldn't get through a presentation without comments from me, but thank you. This actually was I thought this was, exactly as I was expecting for the plan. And I just want to kind of keep reiterating that, we're always looking for areas for opportunity. So we know that we have several manual areas that can benefit from process improvement. And so to the extent that there are no deficiencies doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't aim to improve the process. So we are always looking for recommendations on best practices. So please, please, please make that a priority.
Yes, we will. So thank you for the comments.
Concur 100%. Okay, that's perfect. I definitely appreciate the presentation and the information. We will go ahead and move on to report item B, which is our ethics hotline overview.
Thank you, and good morning, Vice Chair Kehoe and trustees. The The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of the NAVIX Global LACERA partnership, the steps to filing a report, and the case flow from the time LACERA is notified about a case to when it is investigated and reported to the audit committee. Now, LACERA has worked externally with NAVIX Global's ethics point since November of 2019 for its ethics hotline reporting and case management needs. LACERA decided to use an external provider for the added anonymity and security that it provides. Now on this slide, you can see that on the left-hand panel, there are 18 report types that you can choose from when making a report. A report can be made in one of two ways. One, by calling the toll-free third-party hotline, or two, by visiting the secure Ethics Point URL, which is at lacera.ethicspoint.com, and doing the following. You want to select Make a Report on the left-hand panel. From there, select from one of the 18 report types listed. You want to share details of the incident on the report form and hit Submit. And here it's important that the reporter write down the report key and password, because this is the only way for them to check on the status of the report once it has been submitted. And now a case report has been initiated with Ethics Point. On this slide, you can see how the report flows. Once a complaint is made, Ethics Point will notify LACERA. LACERA has two primary points of contact, the audit executive and the chief counsel, who will go onto the Ethics Point portal to access the case details. In the event that the chief audit executive or chief counsel are implicated in the report, Ethics Point will then route the case to the director of HR and whoever was not named in the report. During the investigation process, the chief audit executive and chief counsel may notify the CEO if necessary. Given that many cases are HR-related matters, the chief audit executive and chief counsel may assign the case to HR or another case manager for further review. As for the reporting process.
Sorry to interrupt the presentation, but why does the CEO not be notified at the front end, and what's the reasoning for the review of by chief audit executive, chief counsel before making that decision?
It's still evolving right now, but maybe if Richard and if the chief audit executive and chief counsel can chime in, but the process right now is that the two primary points of contact would review the case, and then based on the case details, they would then notify the CEO.
That is correct, Mr. Kehoe. The chief counsel and myself are the we triage the cases that come in, but generally, yes, we always notify the CEO of the case. The only instance I could think of that we would not notify the CEO is if perhaps the CEO was named in a case, which is clearly not been the case in my experience ever. But so we do notify the CEO of cases that we receive, regardless of whether it's just an HR matter or not just an HR matter, but if it's HR related or something else, we do notify the CEO.
But doesn't NAVIX do that for us if, say, for example, you were implicated or the chief counsel was implicated, it would not be routed to you, right? So
that is correct. It would be routed to the HR director and to the CEO in that case. So the CEO comes into play and gets notified if both the chief counsel and the chief audit executive were named in the allegations.
That's correct.
So my opinion on that is I'll have all three of those involved in the front end. So the CEO, the CAE, the CC, and then if any of those are implicated, then they wouldn't be notified. So, because what I'm hearing from you is the only reason why the CEO would not be notified is if they were implicated. So why not, in order to make it a more accountable process, have NAVIX do that at the front end?
So right now, NAVIX Global's Ethics Point only allows for two primary points of contact, and that's why we identified them as the chief audit executive and chief counsel. But once they review the case details, they could assign it to a primary case manager and other case assignees. So at that point, we could assign it to the CEO for review.
So it's a process issue with the programming itself, that
with the setup, correct?
Two individuals.
administratively, I think the CEO would, wouldn't have the time to work all of these types of things. So I think that's why strategically it goes to the CAE and Chief Counsel.
What are the numbers? Are we? I certainly hope we're not getting that many.
No. It's not. It's not that it's that many numbers, but that was where we believed, and I think with the consulting with Navex, that's the standard, that's the practice they recommended. I think it's certainly up for consideration. It doesn't have to be the Chief Counsel and Chief Audit Executive. One of them could include the CEO, but we have designed it this way, and we do notify the CEO as a matter of course once we receive cases.
So from an accountability standpoint, especially for these type of complaints, ethics hotline complaints, I would think that the CEO should be notified on all of those exclusive, if he's being notified. So I understand there's a process issue with that. So my recommendation would be that the policy is that the primary points of contact automatically send these to the CEO in all circumstances, excluding ones where the CEO is notified or the CEO is implicated. And then you have to decide how to best handle those. So, at that point, that's when you're probably looping in the boards, right? So those things I think need to be clearly identified, and it needs to be part of a formal process so everybody knows that that's how that proceeds. And I have Ms. Sanchez.
Okay, so one of the things that I agree with you, Sean, on the issue of transparency, certainly, because if you're the CEO, you're going to want to have regular reporting, and it sounds as though that is going to be the practice, but codifying it in policy certainly makes it such that somebody could not just suddenly decide to not do that. And so I agree with that. However, one of the things that we do need to keep in mind is administratively, we do want to make sure that the right people are held accountable. Once you get too many people sort of becoming key for this is really at the crux. Unless the CAE is implicated, this is the CAE's main responsibility. Meaning that at the very least, the CAE has to be involved in this, and legal has to be involved in this. So we want to make sure that we're not sort of creating a micromanagement situation at the level of the CEO. Transparency is always important, but I do think that from an actual operational perspective, we want to place the responsibility where it is so that we can hold accountability later. So that if we have a different CAE, we can't have somebody say, oh well, that the CEO never said anything, so we didn't do anything, and you have sort of that volleyball landing between the two people and then not getting bumped. So I want to make sure that responsibility is very clear. And so transparency from a policy perspective, I agree these should all be reported to the CEO unless the CEO is implicated. However, I think that this is the responsibility of the audit and really the legal departments. And if something doesn't happen, then we need, as a committee, to be able to hold them accountable. And so when you start to spread this sort of management too far and wide, you can get a lot of ways of avoiding responsibility. And that's my only thought. But I completely agree with what I think is your intent, which is transparency.
And we do have.
No,
go ahead.
Definitely. So the CEO is aware of any of these type of issues. But you brought up a good question, and I'm interested in what the answer is on this. Is the ultimate responsibility of a ethics complaint that of the chief audit executive, or is it the CEO's responsibility? Oversight wise, obviously the CEO is not going to do the work. It's going to be an HR issue most likely. So where does that responsibility rise? Because at the end of the day, this chief audit executive can't ultimately terminate somebody for committing some sort of ethics violation or relieve somebody of duty. It's ultimately the CEO's responsibility to do that. So that's So, and I see in the investigation process, to me, it looks like it does fall under the realm of the administrative side of the CEO having the ultimate responsibility. Whereas I see this chief audit executive and chief counsel doing the triaging to determine, hey, you know, what level is this? Is it so major that we need to start calling the FBI, or is it to the point where it's a single personnel issue, somebody that's, you know, manipulating a time card, and then getting it to the right responsibility. And ultimately that responsibility is going to be under that of the CEO, most likely an HR issue. So Richard, can you comment on that as far as the actual oversight of the allegation, if it's an internal issue?
Mr. Keogh, I think you actually asked the question and answered it really well. I think you articulated really well that it is ultimately, you know, we triage the issues, we evaluate the risk, and whether the issue is something that, you know, can be handled internally under the direction of human resources, whether it can be handled internally under the direction of internal audit, if there's any investigation to be done, if there's any outside counsel under the attorney-client privilege of the legal office, and certainly ultimately the administrative responsibility of action taken and any corrective action taken would be with the knowledge and under the direction of the chief executive officer.
Okay, so so what we'll do with that is, and I don't want to take over the whole meeting, so I'll pass it on to Catherine, but I think the message was received by the board on the concerns on the flow. So if you could just codify that in proper language and proceed, we'll just treat that as direction to staff unless there's objection from anybody on the board. Perfect.
Yeah, that's noted.
Perfect. Okay, sorry for taking it over. Catherine, back to you.
Oh, no, not a problem at all. And thank you for sharing the comments. It makes sense. But in terms of the reporting process right now, the chief audit executive and chief counsel meet regularly with the case manager to discuss the investigation results and recommended actions. Internal audit will also provide a status update at every audit committee meeting. So when does LACERA get involved? As soon as a complaint is made. As mentioned earlier, information received through Ethics Point are routed to the chief audit executive and chief counsel right now, who must be free from conflicts of interest and not named in the report. Otherwise, Ethics Point will route the report to the director of HR. And we want to emphasize the data security and anonymity of the reporter, so there is reporter protection. In addition, anyone who submits a report can expect an initial response within 5 to 6 business days by logging back into the Ethics Point URL. And since the launch, LACERA has received 4 reports, all of which have been investigated and closed out. Now let's talk about how cases are handled. The LACERA case managers are responsible for communicating with the reporter if additional information is needed, fact-checking the report, and eventually closing out the case. So one of the most important aspects of an ethics hotline, which we touched upon earlier as well, is the dissemination of reports to ensure that only appropriate personnel get complaints regarding their areas of responsibility. The chief audit executive and chief counsel will limit the number of individuals who have access to a case, but still have a system of checks and balances to ensure that complaints are not overlooked. In addition, because many reports relate to HR matters, these reports may be communicated to HR and legal to ensure that both divisions are involved in the investigation. And although many hotline reports do not require immediate attention, there are certain procedures that need to be followed when time-sensitive issues are reported, such as a threat to LACERA staff or a threat to business interruption. Now let's move on to the investigation process. Now all allegations are reviewed by the chief audit executive and chief counsel to determine how they should be investigated. All 4 reports that have come through Ethics Point have involved an internal investigation. But there could be frivolous claims that cannot be substantiated and will not be investigated further. This is after unsuccessful attempts to gather as much evidence as reasonably possible from the reporter. There could also be an internal investigation because there were claims that warrant further investigation. The case manager may ask the reporter for additional facts or evidence by posting questions on the Ethics Point portal. And then there are situations where an external investigation may be conducted. So how does a reporter follow up on a report? The easiest way is to log onto the Ethics Point portal at lacera.ethicspoint.com, click on the follow up on a report on the left-hand panel of the screen, and enter the report key and password that was given to them when they submitted the report initially. The other option is for the reporter to call the toll-free ethics hotline number and provide the report key and password to the Ethics Point representative for status updates. We encourage staff to express concerns, ask questions, and report misconduct to their supervisors if they're comfortable, or by reaching out to HR or the hotline. All complaints are taken seriously and handled in a timely manner. For the hotline, any communication between the case manager and the reporter are made through either the anonymous Ethics Point portal or through the toll-free number. And over time, reports identified from these ethics cases will assist internal audit in evaluating operational, compliance, and management areas that should be evaluated further for inclusion in the annual risk assessment and audit plan. In terms of reporting, internal audit has been providing a high-level summary of the ethics cases at every audit committee meeting. The summary has included a breakdown of the report types, number of cases, and status of those cases. To summarize, LACERA has closed out 4 cases, 3 involving HR matters, and 1 involving another matter. Overall, we see the value of the ethics hotline because it is being utilized by staff. Just this week alone, we received 2 new reports, so now we have a total of 6 cases. We have been making an honest effort to provide awareness materials to staff since we've launched in November 2019. We've circulated posters and provided each staff member with a packet that contained a CEO launch letter, brochure, and magnet. We also continue to reach out to staff during the pandemic with postings on the LACERA intranet and Pulse newsletter. And we plan to provide more communication to staff once we transition back into the office. So this concludes the presentation. Thank you for your time and happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you very much. We'll open it up to any additional questions. Seeing none, let's go ahead and move on to, thank you very much for the presentation. That was very good. And I'm glad to see that the system's up and running and working.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, we will move on to item C, which is a verbal presentation on the status of other external audits not conducted at the discretion of internal audits. Do we have any to report?
I have nothing to report there. I'm not aware of any outside audits being completed at this.
Okay.
Not at the discretion of internal audit.
Thank you. Okay, so item D through I will take for file and receive unless anyone has any.
I have a question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Which item is that?
The RECO follow-up. I am the RECO follow-up police.
Okay.
So I just wanted to inquire about the membership issue. Was that delayed because of the pandemic, or where are we on that? That's the only. And I'm very pleased that we no longer have any items outstanding greater than 3 years. So kudos, improvements. We have 1 item 2 years, which is this membership issue. What's going on with that? The membership coding.
You know, which I'm trying to find which item it is.
It's the orange one. It's the one that is greater than 2 years. It's
on page 9 of the report.
Yeah.
Okay, who from staff would like to address that?
We usually do we have who's the responsible manager for this? That's usually.
No, so this would be Kathy or Semi if you guys want to talk about this. This is a systems related recommendation. It's just been delayed. They're in the process, I believe, of rectifying this.
Do we have either Kathy or Semi available to give us a real-time assessment?
And just so I'm on the same page and everybody else is, which item are we talking, which report item are we talking about? Letter.
Sorry, let me go back to it. It is
Letter E,
Okay,
recommendation follow-up, and it's on page 9 of the recommendation follow-up report.
perfect, thank you.
Top of page 9. Mhm.
yeah, the top of page 9. It's the orange one. If you're not colorblind.
I am, but I can see orange.
Good to hear. Okay, anybody who's working on this, can you give us just some updates on? I have no doubt that the pandemic may have had something to do with it, but let us know what's going on.
Good morning, trustees and members of the audit committee. So for this particular one, we have implemented some manual controls in place right now where we are doing a monthly review of application code changes. This is by virtue of just the system being a legacy system that would be more, would take a lot more effort to build in an automated control. We are exploring those as well, but right now the process is to do a manual review by management from a manager who is not actually part of the application development team, so they can do an actual independent assessment.
Got it. And so because you're reviewing, are you considering an internal build or are you considering an external, some kind of external solution?
So if you don't mind, somebody, I can jump in.
Sure.
So right now we do an internal automated build, and what the tool that we're using does not offer is a correlation between what is actually built on the server and the issues that we are saying are in that build. There's not a connection there. So there's a manual review that's done by somebody outside of the application development group. But what we're moving to is Microsoft DevOps. And that's a feature of that new solution.
Got it. Do we have a timeline? Because I feel like that sometimes takes some time.
It does. So we're looking at September of 2020 to have that done. It's a very disruptive process to move from one development environment to the other. So
I know.
So that's our. But you know, we have our code in that environment right now, but we haven't started the transition. It'll be difficult for all the developers, as you can imagine.
Got it. Yeah, I recognize that that's always painful. I'm just, keeping my practice of making sure that everyone knows that if they start to get way behind, they get to tell us why.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk with you.
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll go back to the reports in general. If there's any other items to discuss D through I. Seeing none, let's go ahead and receive and file those. Move on to the consultant comments. Mr. Griffin.
Good morning, everyone. Got a comment, and I try not to be too folksy here. You don't know what you don't know. And I read a FBI report dated 6/22 where a 3-time offender had been hired by 3 different companies and stole $1.6 million from them over a relatively short period. And it had me questioning if these companies were actually doing background checks to hire somebody and give them the opportunity. I think most people know the fraud triangle. One of the legs of it is opportunity beside pressure and rationalization. As we talked about,
I can't get on until my audit.
As we talked about the stale data checks, it had me thinking that those checks could have easily been misappropriated had you had the wrong people in place, because there definitely was the opportunity. And the woman in question there is actually currently being held in federal custody pending sentencing. And I think this story emphasizes the importance of good controls, which we need in place, and also the importance of background checks on prospective consultants and employees. So that's my 2 cents.
Can I make a question? I have a question for Mr. Griffin. Thank you. That was a very astute observation. And it ran through my mind, because one of the problems with not knowing what you don't know is that we had unexpected checks come in. So we didn't know that these checks were there. And to some degree, we also, while we conducted a review of how we're going to ensure that checks do not come in and go stale going forward, it struck me that we never really determined whether or not any checks were misappropriated historically. And maybe that's maybe a question for Mr. Bendel, but Mr. Griffin brings up a really good point. And I wonder what that means.
No, I think that is a good point. I think, without the strong controls, you have no way to identify whether checks were received that you don't know about. You don't know about the ones you don't know about. So the most important thing is that the receipt of the checks, we create that log, because that is the basis for going back and looking to see what happened to that check that we received, if we received a check. Going forward, but historically speaking, 10 years ago, did we receive a check that didn't get deposited? We don't even know if we received it, or at least there's no record of that. If it was probably handled by staff, I'm certain that checks like that did come in on occasion, were directed back to we hope they were directed back to the appropriate advisor, and they found a way to deposit them. But we don't know, without having the controls in place, to be able to determine that those checks received were eventually deposited.
As a matter of covering all of our bases, is it worth a forensic investigation? I'm just curious.
I think that the effort going back that far, I know there's I think the statute of limitation, all kinds of issues that come into play. I think materiality, and I don't want to say that it's not material. We don't know. Again,
$250,000 may not be material, but it's a lot
like
of
I say,
money.
I'm not speaking about that. I'm speaking about the unknown checks that we don't know about. We don't know what the materiality possibly could be. I mean, if this is any indication, this 260,000 went back to 2013. So I think going back that far, I think it makes sense to improve the controls going forward and to ensure that we have good controls going forward. I think we'd be looking again for something we don't know about. It would be searching for a needle in a haystack. I don't believe it would make sense. That's my professional opinion.
Richard, I agree with you, and I think we're only talking about 19,008, something like that, a little under $20,000. Now that we can't, I don't think we're going to get those checks reissued. Is that correct?
It's possible that we will not get those checks reissued. That is correct.
So I think
this batch.
What would a forensic review cost us?
I think a lot more than it would be likely to determine to find. Yes, yeah. No.
Anyway, thank you, Ms.
Yeah, I got a question for Mr. Griffin. Sitting here not being an expert on it, looks like, Mr. Griffin, that our internal audit has done an incredible job of putting this together. And I think going forward with our accounting firm and the recommendations that they are going to make, we're in pretty good shape. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
You're asking for a professional opinion that I don't, and I don't want to give you an answer that I don't have a basis in fact to support. Certainly, if you look at it from a cost benefit and the risk assessment, you have a lot. You have belts, and you've got a couple of pair of belts and some suspenders in place. Could something happen? It's still probably remotely possible that something could happen.
But my question is, do we have to increase the controls? Are our controls in place that will keep us pretty safe? I mean, I know nothing is perfect. You've got some real bad people out there. I think your comment about background check is really important, making sure we have the right people that are on us. Basic controls, are they in good shape?
I'm sorry, I was having, Mr. Holcomb, I was having a difficult time hearing your comment. It sounded like you
Is this
were-
better? Is this better?
Yes, that's, yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not used to these, this microphone. I was just asking the question, do our basic controls seem to be in good shape? And are there things that we have to improve based on what you've looked at and reviewed on our internal audits?
No, I mean, nothing came to my attention, so I think your basic controls are there. I was giving you the auditor legal leads that I don't know all the facts and circumstances, but certainly if you look at the measures that have been taken, the controls that have been put in place, I think you're in good shape,
Good.
reasonably good shape.
Good. That's what I want to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That brings us to report on staff action items.
There were no requests for items for staff review.
Not the policy, the follow-up on the policy, is that an item?
Yeah, that is. So there is one staff action item, which is to follow up regarding the flow of the ethics hotline.
Yeah, codifying the CEO received notification of all hotline calls unless named.
Thank you. We will now open it up to good of the order. If you can go around the room.
Mr. Oakham?
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank Richard and his staff for doing an outstanding job. Gina, I'd like to thank you for your questions, what were very, very appropriate. You've had the experience to, on this committee. So thank you for that. We won't see everybody have a great July 4th and a very safe one.
Mr. Holcomb, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sanchez?
Thank you. I would like to just say that I think we worked great as a committee today, and so I'm very pleased. And hats off to Mr. Kehoe for leading the effort. And I think we all, I'm patting ourselves on the back, so I'm not going to try to, sprain a muscle here. But and always a big thanks to the staff. The presentations were right on point. And Mr. Griffin, thank you for continuing to be present and engaged with, keeping us on point. This is always an evolving process, and I am very pleased with how the relationship is moving along.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Ms. Ginsburg?
Good morning. Nothing for the group.
Thank you, Ms. Ginsburg. Mr. Kehoe?
I appreciate all the comments from the trustees. Agree 100%. I think that this is an excellent job by staff. Great questions by everyone. It moves us forward as an organization. And I'm actually, I think the last question on do we have the right controls in place? And the answer is great, and it's great to hear. And it's all based on what staff has done over the years to protect the organization. So I appreciate that and appreciate all the trustee engagement. So with that, let's go ahead and is there anyone from staff that has any last comments or thoughts?
I'll just say thank you to the committee for your support, and thanks to all of the executive team and management and staff throughout the organization, and to the internal audit team. I appreciate all the good teamwork, and I thank you for the comments by the audit committee as well. Thank you.
So I will take a motion for everyone's favorite item, adjournment.
So moved.
So moved. Oh. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.